Afternoon, everyone. I'm Tim Rotheray, and I'm Director of the Association for Decentralised Energy. And I'm between the Devon and the Deep Blue Sea. There have been four excellent talks and chair, and the other side is your lunch. So I will try and keep this brief and hopefully keep you all engaged. So this is who we are, the association. That's what we argue for: a cost-effective, efficient, low-carbon, user-led energy system. And we have areas that we work in. District heating and cooling is one of our major strands. Combined heat and power, that's industrial energy and also local building scale. And demand-side energy services. So we do demand response and things like that. And actually those three areas all kind of interact with each other quite well. District heating has CHP. Things like that. So that's what we do. And they're the three areas that we work in: policy, regulation, and market development. And one of the areas in particular inside all of that is reputation, and that's really relevant to district heating, because district heating has a bit of a mixed reputation, and that talk just before mine is particularly helpful in terms of talking about the kind of how you might mitigate those. So that you all know what district heating is, I'm sure, so I'm not going to explain what it is. But the reason that I put these two up, these are two or four images that we've just had done and we put on our website, which explain what district heating is in hopefully a really simple way. There's some text that sits underneath them. But the reason that we've put this in is because a lot of people haven't got a clue what district heating is. And if you are people who want to sell district heating to your FD or to a potential commercial client like a hotel or whatever, there is a tremendous assumption in the energy industry to assume a far higher level of knowledge in the people that you're talking to than they really have. So like we all talk about things like HIUs and plate heat exchangers and all this kind of stuff. Most people don't have a clue what any of that stuff is, and actually most of them don't care. So one of the things that I would encourage people to think about is just the way in which we talk about this entire sector and make it nice and simple. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you quickly about a case study of something that's been really, just to give you an idea of something that was achieved at maybe one of the smaller scale networks that we worked with. And I'm going to talk to you briefly about policy and then two of the key things that we've been doing to try and manage the reputational issue in the sector. The thing is, whereas when we think about district heating, the thing that we think is really, really happening in this sector, everyone's talking about it, is putting the local authorities at the centre. We've been quite heavily involved with the Heat Network Delivery Unit in this establishment, and the more that you talk about this, and the government, and both the Scottish Government and the Department for Energy and Climate Change are both looking at the regulated future of district heating. This is not going to be a sector that, if the governments, or both governments, want it to continue, is going to remain unregulated. Then the thing that you always come back to is that you need a local trusted driver, and your local authority is the one who's going to be involved in that. And there are these four kind of key areas: sustainability, economic and social, and local control. The local control one is really interesting. I don't know if any of you noticed the Infrastructure Commission that's now being chaired by Lord Adonis. Michael Heseltine sits on that. Michael Heseltine has been championing kind of city regeneration and city power and city authority for years, kind of in the background. This whole idea, the Northern Powerhouse, this idea of greater devolution in England as well as in the devolved administrations, is something where district heating fits really well. This is the I thought we'd take a local project. This is a local project where one of our member companies has been involved with. They have connected up 1,100 homes, 23 tower blocks using 12 energy centres. They saved 100,000 tonnes of CO2. I can give people more detail about this. But there are a couple of things that are really interesting about it. One is everyone's talking about circular economy at the minute, aren't they? And these multiple benefits. Some really great things that have happened in this. One is that by making the houses warmer because they fitted them with insulation as well as putting in biomass boilers, there is a reduced level of respiratory illness, and reduced hospital admissions are expected to be linked to that. They have also improved the appearance of the buildings by putting on the wall insulation, which means that there is a reported reduction in local crime. I guess this is really what it's all about. At the end of the day, it's about the people who actually lived here. This woman has been living in these apartments for over 10 years, and she is just delighted to live in a home that feels cosy on cold days. And a lot of the work that we do in the energy sector, I spend an awful lot of time talking about suppliers and people who are making energy, the people who are transmitting it. Very often we forget to talk about the people at the end, the user, and I think that the whole discussion that we've just had about the importance of trust and the user being engaged is really important. This is a really nice example of where the customer's kind of actually really enjoying feeling better. Fergus Ewing, the Energy Minister in Scotland, is absolutely brilliant for this. He's been into a couple of district heating schemes in Scotland, and he has met people. This is always a good thing to do with your local MPs, by the way, and your local councillors. He's met people and who say things like, it's great, I now no longer have to eat my dinner with a duffel coat on. That transformation in people's lives through heat networks is something that is really fascinating to champion and is often not talked about enough. We're often much better about talking about how big our CHP engine is, or whatever it might be. Not that those things aren't interesting. I can do technological geekery with the best of them. So I guess one of the areas that you may well all be interested in is what's happening in policy. Please exclude the pitifully dull slide. But this was announced at our conference last week on the 25th, the day of the spending review. There is £300 million for district heating. I have had some conversations with DEC about that. I will tell you what I know, but I think a lot of people don't know very much about this, including those inside the department. The £300 million is a combination of grant money and financing, and we don't know what that financing might be. It might be low-cost loans, it might be underwriting of other debt that people are securing. The total value of it is £300 million, but it is new money. The other thing is that it covers district heating, and it also covers industrial waste heat recovery to heat networks. So that might be energy from waste plants. It may also be traditional industries which have got a lot of waste heat, and we work with heavy industrial users, people like British Sugar, Boots, and Tata Chemicals, and they're really interested in supplying waste heat into heat networks if they can make it economic. So we're really encouraged by that announcement. I would expect that if you have a project that has had HNDU funding, you are probably more likely to be able to secure some of this simply because you've kind of been through the process with the HNDU team, and the £300 million is directly related to the £2 billion that they have identified in the 180 projects that they supported 150 local authorities, and the idea is that the £300 million will leverage the total £2 billion investment. But this is a massive step change in the government approach to district heating, and is probably the result of about 4 years' worth of engagement with DEC on that, so we're very excited. We actually don't know for sure if HNDU is to be extended. They've just finished their 5th funding round to take up to 10 million, but I would be very surprised, given the 300 million, if they do nothing to extend it. The other bit that kind of people didn't always pick up on was this public sector building efficiency announcement that was made also at the CSR last week. For those of you who are looking to do things like district heating and on-site CHP, it would be likely, and we will certainly be working to make sure that this is the case, that there is an opportunity to make use of some of this money as well. So there could be up to £500 million, some of which will go into the sector, which is excellent. Eco3 is going to be focused on the fuel poor. Again, an opportunity there for it to be combined. A lot of the work that we've seen, the case study I've talked to you about before, managed to combine eco-funding with RHI support in order to make the project investable. So that Eco3 work that's going on, that is something that you should definitely look at. And then, of course, the RHI was extended, and there is now £1.7 billion in the RHI. we sit on the RHI working group that the government has for developing it, and we have noticed there's been a lot of problems in terms of making the RHI bankable for district heating, because district heating takes a long time to develop, and by the time you get to the other end and you do all the financial sign-off, and then sort of 5 years later, someone actually has got the energy centre to the point where they can put in the biomass boiler and they find there is no RHI, which means that they then can't sign it off in the first place. There is a proposal on the desk of the RHI team, which we've been working on with them, to make the RHI more bankable. I don't know where that's going to go, but because they're going to be changing the RHI to make it more cost-effective, some of the things that the RHI has been supporting have been rather expensive. We've come up with a figure of about £800 a tonne in the worst case for CO2 abatement, which is very good value money for taxpayers. So the RHI, again, this is something that all of these things can be put together. So in terms of this sector, heat, district heating, the government has really started to take notice. A lot of this is the England and Wales only. Scotland is absolutely motoring ahead and is going to be coming out with a document soon on how to regulate district heating, and I've been involved with the Scottish Government in developing that, it's all quite interesting. There's a lot happening and there's a lot of opportunity. I can't go into all of it, but if you're interested, do grab me. I'm around. I'm at dinner this evening. And local authorities, this is something I just wanted to flag up, are still able to require carbon savings in new build. And I know that there's been changes to the Planning and Energy Act and so forth. It is still possible to make the kind of requirements that people have been making in terms of new connections to district heating. And that is a power that's been used very effectively in London, but also by others. So that is kind of a very, very high-speed flit through policy. I did want to say one thing. Tanya picked up very interestingly on CHP, and if you're doing CHP and you've got electrical sales and so forth, think about it. Absolutely do. It's a very key driver. The value for power sales from CHP are really important. There's a couple of things that I'd just be aware of. One is there is real value in thinking really, really deeply about how you're going to do your CHP. There's lots of people who are not getting the value. We had a big fight with the National Grid last year. It's the third time that we fought this fight, and we think we have sort of nailed it, I think. And that is the embedded benefit. I don't know if you know, the embedded benefit is worth about £25 a kilowatt a year. If you do the maths, it's quite significant. That embedded benefit does not automatically accrue to the person that operates the CHP plant. It actually accrues to the supplier. You need to have a negotiation with your electricity supplier about getting that value or a share of that value for your plant in order to benefit from it. That is one of a number of examples. Short-term operational reserve. I don't know if any of you have heard that one of the companies that we work with, Flextricity, has got a new product which is called Footroom, which is when there's too much electricity on the system, you're paid for taking electricity. How many people are thinking about putting electric boilers in thermal stores? How many people are putting thermal stores in that are big enough to enable their CHP plants to run for more than a few minutes to actually fill up their thermal stores, so that when there are real opportunities in the electricity system, they can disconnect their heat supply from their power generation? Again, it's a very high-speed run through some of those critical things. The more cleverly people think about this kind of thing, the more value people can extract. Lots of people have got lots of assets that they could do much, much more with if they put the time, and I've realised that's always a constraint into thinking about them. Anyway, that's just a little comment. So the first thing I wanted to talk about in terms of what we're doing, because we think that there are bad news stories about district heating. We are aware of them, and we know there are some great news stories about district heating, but you know what people say, someone has a good experience, they tell one person, they have a bad experience, they tell about 15. And district heating is particularly bad for that, because if you have 500 people on a network, and they all have something really bad, and sometimes that really happens, and lots of people have a very bad experience, and then they tell lots and lots of people, and it does an awful lot of damage, and we get letters from MPs and councillors rightly saying this is not good enough, and it's not. So the two things, the first thing is code of practice. This is about building. There were no standards at all for installation, operation and maintenance of heat networks in the UK. It meant that developers didn't have a clear path to demand best practice. It meant that the procurement of district heating became more complex and increased the cost, and it also decreased the reliability of schemes. And you get lots of people who come in and effectively say, well, you've got to do this and I can do it for you, and people are really unsure as to whether it's being delivered. So we have worked over 2 years, the ADE and CIBSI, we formed a partnership, and we got all of the great and good technical designers from all of the companies, Vital Energy and Cofree, and I'm not going to name them all, about 50 engineers all sat around a table and talked about things, lots of thermodynamics and pipe sizing and diversity factors and all these kind of things, and have developed, it's a significant guide. It is like 140 pages, I do apologise, but there's a lot in there. But the whole point of it is to make sure that from cradle to grave, you can procure the district heating scheme that you want, that is appropriately sized, that does deliver, that does make sure that the people who are at the end of it will have a scheme that really delivers for them. And the last thing that you want is for someone to put in a scheme that's oversized, which is what normally happens, and then you find out all your tenants are massively overheated, for example. It does happen. The code of practice has been produced to address that, and it creates a chain of responsibilities between the different segments. We are currently working on looking at how you might make this legally binding, how someone might put it into a contract, because the first thing we had to do was get the guide and get everyone to agree on the standards. The next thing is to say, well, if you're procuring a scheme, how do you actually make sure that someone delivers? And what happens if someone who comes in and does a job for a short period of time and then leaves and has no long-term contractual obligation? How do you make sure that that can be met? We're working on that, and as soon as we have more to tell you, I'll let you know. The second thing that we've done is this thing on customers. We think that district heating has got to work for customers, and the most vulnerable of all the customers are householders, because they are in a position of imbalance compared to a larger organisation who's supplying their heat. Excuse the error, sorry, the spelling error, it's deliberate. Make sure you're still awake. Our view is that this is benefit has a twofold benefit. The first thing is customers themselves need to have proper protection, and they don't. But also the industry itself needs to have a good reputation. The better the reputation is, the more people will come into the market, it will help pull down the risk, and it will help pull down the cost. And those things are really important, because one of the things that's stopping this market are not just the barriers that people have talked about, but actually that it's a small market, and the reason it's a small market, one of the reasons is it's high cost. And our market is typically about 20 to 30% more expensive than other comparable European states, simply because it's a small market. So these are the principles on which we've developed the scheme. It had to be independent. It has to be fairly untechnical. It has to be as similar as the other regulated utilities. So if we've looked at gas and we've looked at electricity, looked at everything that happens in those, and we have effectively said, how could you make that work for heat? It's designed to cover as many customers as possible. It's designed to be extremely transparent in terms of how it operates, and like everything we do, it's not for profit. It has to be based on the customer having a good and easy-to-use experience, and it's based on critical areas only. So it doesn't, it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say, heat interface units should all be white, although they should, by the way, because it makes them look like boilers, and people are happy with boilers. But anyway, so there's a number of things that happen. And I think it's really interesting to build on what's been talked about earlier. There's a big question of who makes sure that the person that's supplying the heat actually does the job that they're supposed to be doing? And what happens is if a company enters into heat trust, they sign a contract and they are contractually bound to deliver what the requirements are in their contract, and those contracts have to comply with what heat trust sets out. And there are two really important things. One of them is guaranteed service level payments. This is exactly what happens in gas and electricity. It looks an awful lot worse than it is, by the way. We have done a bit of a survey of district heating schemes. This kind of, unless it's a very bad scheme, this kind of thing is very rare to arise. But basically, if you have a situation where there's an unplanned interruption, if someone phones up, you have effectively 48 hours in order to fix it, before you then have to start making a payment to those customers for failing to supply them with heat. On the whole, a lot of the work that we see, people generally make a 4-hour guarantee to restore heat, but there are minimum payments, and that's to assure customers this is going to deliver for you. So it's exactly the same that happens in gas and electricity. Another thing that happens is that we have created a heat charge comparator. This has not yet launched. It will launch in the new year. customers really complain a lot about not understanding district heating costs. So this is how we've calculated it. Please excuse the formula, but basically, of course, as many of you will know, people look at gas and they go, well, I can buy gas for 4 pence and you're charging me 7 pence. And you say, yes, but of course, when you buy gas, you're not paying for the boiler cost. The boiler cost is something that you pay once every average 11 years, and then there's an efficiency of that boiler and so forth. And then there is maintenance, all of which not included. We have spoken with a number of organisations, which, Ofgem and others, they agree that this is the right approach to calculate how much district heating costs. People will be able to put in their information and it will give them an idea as to whether or not they are paying more or less than if they had been on gas. We are working at developing an electric comparator as well. Unfortunately, we don't yet have the funds to do it, but once we do, we will. There's a couple of other things that I want to say. The Ombudsman service, I think this is probably the most important thing. People sign up to this. They are subject to the same energy ombudsman, and basically the customer has 8 weeks to have their complaint resolved by their supplier. If the supplier doesn't resolve the complaint goes to the energy ombudsman at the cost of the supplier. It's up to about £400. And then the ombudsman makes a ruling, and that ruling is binding, and the ombudsman can award in extremis. It's they very rarely do this, up to £10,000 a customer as a fine on the supplier. In reality, the fines in the electricity and gas sector are normally about sort of £50 to £100, and that's one of the 3 things they can do. They can also tell the supplier just to remedy the situation or to offer a full apology. But the point is that all of this is binding. The scheme at the moment is voluntary. The Scottish Government and DEC are looking at whether policy should increasingly require people to be part of this. There's a charge, it's a minimum charge for people to be part of the scheme. I can give people lots more detail on it, but this is our piece of work, along with the code of practice, designed to make sure that when you build your district heating schemes, you can have confidence that they actually work and that your customers can trust that they're fair. Thank you very much.